What have I been doing? So I moved to the Bay Area about 15 years ago, actually this month. Yeah, February. It was probably maybe this week, next week, like Valentine's Day. And the goal, so after Boulder, I'd moved back to Chicago. And then 10 years later, I made another move out to California here. And I went to work for Netflix. So I had a buddy who recruited me out there, and then I ended up recruiting a bunch of people I knew from the Chicago area. It's really easy, as you folks know from the Midwest, to recruit people during the winter from the Midwest, right? So usually around November, you start kind of pinging them, get it in their head. And, because November's not bad. December's not even bad in the Midwest. It's January, February, right? That really unloads.
That's the time I miss.
Pull a bunch of people over.
I used to bike around Chicago all year round, and I loved it. But yeah,
Did you?
It takes a certain kind of twisted mind.
The first time I tried that, I had bought all the North Face gear, the windproof, all the ear stuff, and I used to ride right down the lake because I worked right off Yuri there.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first time, it was super cold, I got hit by a wave.
Whoa!
On the bike path.
No way!
Oh, shit.
Like I was riding my bike and I saw a whole bunch of water, and it was real early. It was probably 7:30 in the morning, real early. And I saw a huge amount of water on the bike path, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, and it all was happening fast.
Sure.
And I look over, and there is this like monsoon coming. Yeah, monsoon's not the right word, but like tidal wave coming over. And I'm looking at it, and all I could do was steer into it.
Yes.
Because
wow, that is so on the money.
Pushed me. It pushed me and my bike all the way up to the wall of like Lakeshore Drive.
Okay.
And so I was a little bit shaken, and then there was a runner who saw this, so he ran up, but the water was about to pull me and my bike back in, right? Yeah. I was more worried about my bike because it was a nice Cannondale at the time. I'm like, I don't want to replace this damn thing.
What a great story. Let me just take a little note on that. I'm working on dividing the topics of people we interview and the topics we entertain in two ways. One of them is, the description I've been using is people who are swimming right into the wave of AI and people who are heading for dry ground, people who are going even more analog, right? So it's great that you would say that. Anyway, so then that was probably when you got home from that, you probably decided, I'm leaving Chicago.
Yeah, that was bad. Well, yeah, exactly. It was really the first time because I was getting myself back into shape. I was trying to do it year round. I was kept trying to say I could do this during the winter. I could, and not just be a gym rat the whole time, because I had been a gym rat my entire, like adult life. So yeah, I said, screw this. And then decided at that point,
pull stakes.
That actually happened, I think, before my move to Boulder, honestly.
Oh, okay.
And then, so Boulder was still a little bit too cold and a little bit too, there's snow. So there's no snow in California, even Northern California. So yeah. And then, so I guess, kind of tying this to, AI, I really do. In fact, I just tweeted yesterday, and, I don't tweet that much, but I felt pretty strongly about a particular topic that was being discussed. Someone posted that it appears that, currently some percentage of all code is being generated with AI, right? But it was a relatively low percentage. And my specific tweet was anything less than 100% at this point, 2026 is just wasteful. Like all code should be 100% like generated. And once you make that mind shift, and I've worked with a couple development teams to kind of make that switch, it's very difficult. We're still in a phase where the engineering managers are a bit skeptical. There's still judgment if you want to use AI assistants. I'm starting to see more and more, I guess you'd say, sort of interview questions. I work with a lot of companies. I do a lot of like the advising, and we talk about the interview process quite a bit. And one of the pieces of feedback that I keep giving is, let these folks use the AI assistants during the interviews. Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous because they are going to anyway in some way, right? There's tools out there to do it. They might have a second laptop. Just let them do it. And actually part of the evaluation should be how well can they use these tools?
You just laid a gauntlet, which like right directly into one of the things that we have hotly debated. I'm glad you said it.
So you started it somewhere that was calling itself machine learning before because they probably weren't talking about AI or neural nets or somewhere. Like, did you remember the first time you were doing that work?
Yeah, for sure. Even back at BEA when you and I worked there in Boulder,
Yeah.
the team that I was on was, doing recommendations like personalization. And so that was really early 2000s when I kind of caught the bug.
Okay.
And once you see the output of, the sort of impact that like recommendations and personalization has, and it was very, very crude back then, very, very basic, like simple algorithms. But once you see the stickiness that it creates, right? So I'm not just interacting with the site like the other, 300 million people that are interacting with the site. I'm actually seeing personalization. So I do remember spending quite a lot of time researching how does like my Yahoo work, back then was the rage and stuff, and trying to figure out and, capture the magic. And then so fast forward and then I didn't see a lot of that in Chicago, unfortunately. What I've noticed is the coasts seem to pick up these things a lot quicker than the, middle America. And I finally had to admit that. I didn't want to admit it. There just weren't as many of those opportunities in the Midwest at that time. Now that's changed quite a bit. When I moved to the Bay Area, like Groupon was just starting to get big, right? And they were doing like quite a lot of personalization recommendations things. So the landscape has changed. And then really not until I got to Netflix did I really, really understand the power of both data and these sort of algorithmic, changes. So that was back when Netflix was running what they called the Netflix challenge. And they had basically opened up like an anonymous data source that showed, people's clicks and, play events, what people were watching, how long they were watching for. Back then it was real simple ratings. I think it might have been a 1 to 5 star, rating kind of thing. And they actually open source this data set and ask researchers. And funny enough, one of the participants were the Spark people, who now runs Databricks, right?
Okay.
And so the Berkeley lab took on this challenge. It wasn't a huge data set, but it was sort of an early way. And so Spark from the beginning, and then of course I went on to work for like Databricks and really, really caught the bug there because
I want to touch base. So I remember early Netflix, because I was still in Boulder. My wife and I had not even married. We were getting together, and Netflix, I remember it was red envelope, right?
Yeah.
And we shared the same account, right? Don't tell Netflix. But anyway, back then we shared the same account, and then I remember they were pushing the social angle of Netflix a lot, right? And so
Facebook integration.
And so one of her pals in the graduate program we were in, who I think we hadn't really spread it around that we were dating, until we showed them a baby we made. They were like, wow, that was fast. And we're like, yeah, that escalated quickly. But one of her friends said, do you like things to do in Denver when you're dead? And she's like, no, that's Matt. So I would give rave reviews to these really gory movies that were way outside of her. In fact, I remember I still have a bruise from when she punched me after I showed her that movie. But anyway, just a side note about where Netflix was when you were talking about that. They were really banking on the social stuff before they became such an entrenched, before they made the leap to mostly online.
So I just wanted to jump in. I didn't want to stop this flow, but I do want to make sure that we hit some of the top line parts of this conversation, set some of the frame. Matthew, you said I should read. I love reading Matthew's writing. Anyway, so welcome to World Brain No Experts. In 1938, as the world neared total war, H.G. Wells published World Brain, arguing that a global encyclopedia using a new technology called microfilm could bring about world peace. Taking the H.G. Wells essay collection as a departure point, two old friends and their guests offer a hyperbolic and inexpert conversation about the screaming arrival of AI. What has been awakened? Rough beast, benevolent angel, or boring super appliance? Are there any true experts? Could a few relatively smart outsiders be any less wrong about AI, what it is, what changes it's going to make in our lives, than the glory-drunk founders, their whorish enablers, or the terrifying doomsayers? Finally, can an unstructured discussion between humans meaningfully enrich our understanding of the boundaries between us and what has been created. So
Very well said.
I hope that we've at least managed to offend you in at least two ways with that introduction.
Yeah, where do we start?
Yeah, just
So,
say
I mean,
words, man.
I think we start with two main questions. Number one, which is, where do you stand on that? The most, like, if you have one sentence to describe what's happening, how do you describe it?
Wow. I think all of those statements are true at the same time.
Yeah.
And which is kind of a weak answer, but I think there's different aspects. I personally am not a doomsday type of person, right? I always embrace these things. I have to say the one time I was a little bit taken off guard was when Jeffrey Hinton left Google and said, "This is bad news bears. Like, this is a bad situation and we have to stop this." And I think he's softened up a little bit. You know, he's the godfather of AI
Yes.
by some accounts, and I agree with that. I think what was the boring appliance?
Boring super
Boring
appliance.
super appliance. That's my favorite one.
Boring super appliance, I think, honestly, I had never heard it described that way. I actually appeal to that one the most. I think as long as there's folks out there focused on, like the other day, I was trying to do something that I thought was not that big of a deal. I was trying to get ChatGPT to make a change on a document, and I still don't understand why it didn't allow it, but it felt that it was not the right thing to do. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm still going to do it. I'm just going to use a different tool, right? So I went to Grok or whatever would let me do it, right? Grok with a K. But I think for most of the world, I think it could just be a boring super appliance. I rely on AI, every day for everything. In fact, I made a pact with myself that I would not write a single line of code by hand in the year 2026. So last year I did because I was writing a book, and all of that has to be authentic. And I, built a GitHub repo that's pretty that supports the book. But 2026, anyone that's like writing code by hand, I think, needs to revisit. And I've encouraged not two, but three teams now that I worked with, that I started working with last year, that I continue to work with this year, to give your teams the freedom. If you're an engineering manager, give your teams the freedom to use these tools, to use all the tools, spend all the money. They'll each member over 1 week will probably spend about $4,000 in tokens. And my advice is have Claude review code that GPT-5 is generating, codecs, and go back and forth. That to me is the best combination. It burns twice as many tokens, but each model has its own quirks. And then I just recently started using Gemini, and now I've got Gemini that's in the mix. And and so they all kind of review each other and they all find different things. And people ask me all the time, what's your workflow? And, really it's complete chaos. And I liken it to when you're flying a plane and you're in a fog, you have to rely on your instruments, right? And the instruments in this case are like the evaluations and even unit tests to some degree. I would argue unit tests are not as critical as they used to be. They're a little bit too fine-grained. They tend to slow down the refactoring process. And really, you should more rely on kind of the evals, because that's ultimately what affects the end user. But,
so on that note, Chris, quickly, we had our other, I don't know if you heard any of our podcasts before you joined.
That was my second question.
Okay, sorry. What's your second question, Yuri?
No, that's it. That's my second question.
So
did you listen
to any of the other stuff?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, so we got two people who interviewed who showed up without having listened. Now we got to find somebody who's listened who also shows up, because that's
who's willing to talk to us. We're not quite sure if
we don't have any data on that side. Exactly. Like I heard your stuff, man. I'm not sure. I got a cold.
Yes.
But so The guy we interviewed was a German researcher he's been using AI for a long time, and he's pretty eccentric, but really into philosophy and into education, but has been using AI for a lot of different things with a lot of different. He had an AI driven company in Germany for 6 or 7 years, and one of the things he said is that one of the companies he's working with right now is using Claude to generate all their code, and he's seen maintenance costs go up at that company a lot. And so my thinking was, because I didn't talk too much about this. What I did for PayPal for like 7 years was I worked with leaders in software like Peter Graf from SciSpike and Vladimir Bekvansky and Raymond Hedinger from Python. You've probably heard his name, right? I trained hordes of developers, right, all over the world for PayPal. I helped bring in Node to transform their AI. It wasn't my idea, but I helped implement the training that went on to help us go from servlets, which is what we were doing at BEA 10 years before that. Anyway, to going to Node4j. And I also worked with Crockford, Doug Crockford. We had him teach his awesome lectures on JavaScript for a long time. JavaScript, the good parts. Anyway, all that stuff made me think that when Jobst, our first interview, said that costs had gone up because his reasoning was that the code that Claude was generating was really heterogeneous. They would use a mix of styles, and there was no adherence to styles or patterns in a way. And so when humans went to maintain it, it was a lot more expensive. What I thought was, wouldn't it be kind of easy to get to prompt Claude correctly and say, look, use this gang of 4 pattern for this stuff when you implement it, and use this. I mean, am I wrong on that, or does that seem like
so? Wait,
a
hang on.
thing?
Wait. I just have to we got to add a little bit more. So
sure,
because Chris, you just got the suburban shopping mall version of how this conversation has been going. It has not been nearly as civilized as what Matthew just described.
Yeah,
not at all. So Matthew and I have been going tooth and nail with me in a weird position of being sort of like, there's a lot of human-like and extremely valuable stuff that's very mind-blowing and very, very useful. And Matthew, initially at least, like saying, like, most of this is just pure garbage. Pure and utter garbage.
Sure.
And it's just feeding into the corruption that our society is already sinking under. Now, into that lovely conversation, which has actually really been fun, we brought this guy, and from my point of view, Jobst, this German mathematician, engineer, software developer, tries to add his scientific argument to
You should
Matt's
listen to
position.
that one, Chris, because it's fun.
I will. So
it's fun.
First of all, he wrote a book with a philosopher called "Why Machines Will Never Rule the World."
Subtitle:
AI without fear, in which he basically says that any kind of approximation or even something that you could really call intelligence, or even something that's even useful in that realm, is mathematically impossible. It breaks the laws of mathematics and physics. Now, it happens that my brother is a theoretical physicist, and my brother kind of laughed when I told him a lot of those propositions. And by the way, we're talking about a very dense book filled with formulas.
And we're bringing him back for sure. Yeah. So we can't say, we have to save some of our questions for when it gets back.
From my point of view, Matt, Jobst, and Matt raked me over the coals for 2 hours, basically laughing at me when I tried to say something like, actually a self-driving car might save lives, or software developers might be more productive if they're using AI tools well. And so one of many arguments that Jobst gives is the problem with enterprise level software development is it's not reproducible, right? So you've got these machines that developers are working with, and it's generating good code. The problem is it does it differently every time, and you cannot control the differentiation within the code base, and so you end up with something that's unmanageable.
Yeah, so answer that one, Chris, because that's a question I really wanted to give to you.
That's the crux.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so I would love to come back on with him.
Great.
On that.
Awesome. I love that. That would be awesome.
Yeah. Let's see. So I guess stepping back a tiny bit, you have to be, so that's why when I say let your team explore, right? Maybe give 1 or 2 weeks per person, stagger it so that
Mhm.
you can continue with your legacy workflows
Sure.
and maintain sanity. But let people take a feature, take a bug fix, take whatever, and just pipe it through these tools, figure out the workflow. You will generate a lot of slop. It will be very difficult to resolve. I have this sort of background, I call it like a background reaper that is constantly, so I basically have an agent that's constantly reviewing the slop and saying, find consistencies, find inconsistencies.
Mhm.
This is extremely important when you're trying to derive prompts. So I use these agents a lot to find the best prompt for a particular model, for a particular task. When I'm doing this, especially spread across tasks and different features, because at like any given point in time, I've got like 10 to 15 agents that are running on the same code base. And this has potential to create conflicting rules and things.
Sure.
And so one of the mistakes I made very early was not having a good harness to run the evaluations. And without these evaluations, you have no way of knowing if you're staying on target. So you have to be comfortable with the ambiguity. And one thing I've noticed, people that tend to reject this style, is that they don't seem to be comfortable with that ambiguity, right? With the non-determinism. You just got to get over it, right? And rely on the instruments, like a pilot in a fog. You need to know that, and I don't think the goal is to necessarily make it human maintainable,
Okay.
which is why I'm saying either
No,
go
that's a
in
great question.
100% or you're just going to always be, dancing around and then finding reasons to not use these things. Just
Okay.
give up and rely on the instruments.
Wow.
One of the
Okay.
other mistakes I made early on was relying on my unit tests. And that's just because I'm older and I've come from a test-driven, and
Sure.
I like seeing
Old
green
school.
checks.
Oh yeah.
Those green checks at the unit test level mean almost nothing in this new world. What matters is the evals. And so evals are as close as you can get to the actual business, right? Like outcomes that you're trying to achieve. These evals get tricky when it's a multi-turn type of thing. I mean, I've worked on a couple concierge type of products now with some companies, and you know, these LLMs can certainly go off the rails when they're not constrained through tight prompts and have good guardrails. And this turns a lot of people off, and people give up and they just stop working on it. And I've seen this happen twice now, where leadership has just completely given up and said, this isn't working. The worst mindset to go in is that the LLM that I can just call the like OpenAI or the Claude API, and it will know what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
It will know everything about the user. It's gonna, and be hyper personalized. It's gonna know that they feel like going to see a particular type of concert this weekend, and when really it has no idea unless you're able to capture the memories and capture the interactions. You still need a database. You still need something like a Supabase or, ClickHouse or something like that. You still need Postgres somewhere. You need DynamoDB somewhere, right? It's not all magical, right?
Okay. So it seems like to me, I like your answer. I like what you're talking about because you're so in it. I guess I find myself wondering now, either there's a section in your book that addresses like workflow for devs with an AI first mindset, or not, or you could point to one, or maybe there's some post you've done that might address this or summarize it. Maybe you can get back to us with that or throw it in the notes or something. But then the other one is this, the slur for it, I think, has been vibes coding, right? And the
vibe
implication
coding,
is
yeah.
like slop in, slop out. Like people are just
Yeah.
not really listening. I mean, here's the thing. I think we all probably can envision worst case scenarios for adoption where, worst case scenarios where businesses take a whole group of people and say, adopt AI now. And I've seen this with my own eyes, not at any of the places I've mentioned before, but in a recent engagement I had. They basically said, we're doing this documentation so the AI will do all your work. And they never even said, we're going to automate the boring stuff so you can work on interesting stuff. That was me saying that to try to sweeten the pot because I didn't
To
want
keep
people
them
glaring at me during meetings,
from,
right?
yeah.
But I think that what we discussed with Yobst, one of the things I said was, I think it's really likely, knowing the business people we all know, right, that leadership is going to say, so you're saying I can fire my whole group of blah, blah, blah people, replace them with AI agents, and just see how it goes and maybe tweak it on the way. So I think there are a lot of people who know what these cool tools are capable of, who can say, like, if carefully done, blah, 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 we can do A, B, and C.
Well,
and a lot of leaders are saying, let's just put it in there and see what it does. So I guess I would just want to
you have
speak
to
to that.
clarify. You have to clarify Yop's position, because Yop's position is really, I don't care about that, because the promise of any kind of true autonomy for an agent, the true useful abilities that these systems have, is about to hit a brick wall, because they just aren't going to be able to develop as quickly as everyone thinks they are, and they're about to slow down and in fact fall flat on their faces. And this is somebody who will also speak glowingly about some of the engineering marvels that have already been done. He knows and appreciates some of it, but as my brother said to me, he's also sort of biology obsessed, right? His main point is, and we talked a lot about aviation, humans will never create a flying machine that flies the way birds do, the way evolution created a flying animal. And in the same way, it's absolutely scientifically impossible that humans will ever create a thinking machine that approximates the human mind. And the answer there is, you're absolutely right. But I like what you said earlier, Chris, which is, yeah, but nobody's trying to do that. We're not trying to create an approximation of the human mind, but we are trying to create something that will revolutionize how we work.
Yeah.
It will do things that you could never have imagined, and it will continue to be more and more useful. And so that's one of the big questions. Like, do you think this thing is going to continue to grow as fast as it's growing right now? Because it's moving fast right now.
It's moving fast. So to give a concrete example, well, okay. Yeah, I'll start with the short answer. I think this is the time to forget about trying to like rationalize and trying to explain this whole revolution, right? I think if you spend it, like, you can either spend time like finding reasons why this doesn't make sense. So for example, my high school in Chicago, my physics teacher, who looked exactly like Albert Einstein, it was the funniest thing. Yeah, he was also our football coach. He was a big dude. He had the big hair. He was like the most macho person to me as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old. It was the advanced physics class. He refused to fly. Absolutely refused. And it's because he could not prove, just like you were saying, he could not prove that something that heavy could actually take flight.
Wow.
Now, like,
Living your
despite some of this
convictions.
ridiculous, yeah. And so, of course, this was like the first day of my class, and I'm like, I'm going to fail the AP exam. I have no idea. Like, how the hell am I going to get through this course when this dude can't even prove flight? So needless to say, I did well on, the AP. Yeah, I got into a good school and everything. It reminds me of these deep thinkers that spend a lot of time thinking about this and convincing themselves that this is not possible. And I'm a practitioner,
Yeah.
I like to get shit done. And if it's not working, I'll stop using it. But I think this is a case where just kind of keep an open mind, look at the benefits, accept these, rough edges, accept like the inefficiencies. So I have a lot of German friends, for example, they do not like inefficiencies, and some of those friends don't really buy into this whole thing because they can't explain it, because they think it's too costly, it's too many tokens, it's too much power, this and that. At the end of the day, I let them argue with themselves and with other like-minded people, and at the same time I'm cranking out large code bases that are doing very complex things. I'll say one other thing too, is when people have these opinions, I really probe into the complexity of the work that they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say that on kind of both sides of this argument, which is there's people that go in and they build a website that has some sliders and maybe connects to a SQL database, Postgres or MySQL or something, and they think this is like the end all be all, like I could do everything. That's not a good signal because that's too simple. And I can often tell, I'll be a little bit controversial to say, everyone thinks Claude Code is the absolute best model. Now, Claude was Opus 5.3, was it 4.6 just came out yesterday. I haven't even had a chance to touch it. The new GPT model from the OpenAI folks came out like 3 minutes later or something, strangely.
Is that the Codex one or is that a different?
Codex, yeah. So specifically for the, coding model.
Yep.
So two brand new models hit yesterday. So I'm talking about 2 days ago is my, experience.
A century ago.
Yeah, a century ago. I'll be a bit controversial to say I actually prefer Codex because for larger code bases, so this is where you have to really parse out and say, okay, are you just building a website? In which case, Claude
Use
works
Notion.
well. Yeah, right. Right. I could use GoDaddy for that, right? I could pay $4.99 or
Wix.com. It's good.
Wix. Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, do you remember those guys? So funny.
Oh.
But yeah, just to wrap this up, the size of the code base and the complexity really, really matters. And I can always tell when someone's really gung-ho about one model versus the other, what size code base that they're dealing with. And this is just the current state. And I know Claude yesterday with their new release now supports like a larger token limit and a context limit and things. But there's just so many variables right now that you kind of have to ask more, qualifying questions. But yeah, what I've noticed with Claude 4.5 anyway, Opus 4.5, is that it doesn't always complete the task. It kind of gets there, but it just sort of forgets to do the rest of it. And so I was using Claude very heavily. That's when I started using Codex to review Claude's output. And Codex would always find something. What's funny is that they sort of always find something, right? And and then I started telling them, hey, the OpenAI Codex model found this. And there's a bit of envy going on here. Like I can see in the thinking.
That's cool. Chris, so I did ask you this a little bit before, but we went on to something else before we let you talk. Is there anybody you can see, or do you ever do this, where you kind of describe, here's the way I work as a developer? Like, is anybody doing that in a fantastic way? Because your book seems to be so much about, performance engineering, right, for AI. So that's not the same thing, I don't think.
Yeah. I've got a bit of a split personality over the last year because I did spend all of last year diving extremely deep into hardware and into CUDA. And what I was going to say about that experience was, I used like ChatGPT, I used Claude to do all the research. Like the reason that book is like 1,000 pages, by the way, is that it's really 3 books and it's in it's 20 chapters. My workflow for that was, I had a whole bunch of ideas. Like starting this book, I had 700 pages of notes that spanned Twitter, X tweets and, I even had Instagram pictures of conferences that I was scraping and, asking a ChatGPT to, give me more information about this, like extract these bullet points. And of course, part of it came from the NVIDIA documentation and, Meta's PyTorch documentation. And when I was I was doing this for my day-to-day job. I was trying to really, really understand like the depth of PyTorch and like how do all these things come together.
Yeah.
There's books and there's resources on each of these things, the CUDA layer and, the NVIDIA systems layer, but I couldn't really get one place to do it. And so, and at the same time, I was trying to optimize kernels and I was doing all this by hand and I had to research a million different things. And so my goal was to just put my notes into Codex or Claude and basically sort of treat it like a RAG pipeline, right? Okay, here's this collection that would otherwise take you on, different. So I guess there was the split personality in that I was doing low-level things and I was writing a book, but at the same time, I was helping companies try to build the best prompts and try to actually do, and they do sort of overlap a bit, but it's not like you really need to understand the NVIDIA hardware to, build an e-commerce, like concierge recommendation, type of agent. But
So you said 3 books.
Chris,
what 3 books are they? Because I've got it here.
Can you pitch your books for us and let us know who they're for? I'd love to know who your audiences are.
So I've written 3 books with O'Reilly.
Yeah.
But this most recent book is actually 3 books in one, and just because of the surface area that I cover. So first book, that was about data science and specifically using the AWS. I had just joined AWS through an acquisition, and I was trying to make sense of SageMaker, and I was trying to make sense of analytics, and because I'd come from like Databricks, and so I knew on the Spark side, and I knew all the, core like machine learning algorithms, but I needed to understand how to work with it. So really it was a how-to. That was actually a super big seller. I didn't expect that, but I guess there's a lot of folks out there that are trying to do data science, and, that book's from 2020 or 2021, I think. And then,
And do you know who was buying it? Was it industry? Was it academia? Combination?
oh, interesting. Yeah. It was mostly the industry. However, throughout the years, I found out that it is being used by some of the academics. I know here in the Bay Area, I think Santa Clara University has been giving it out to students. I know I've been contacted by like a bunch of East Coast schools, that use it, that I've spoken. Yeah, even I spoke with my old alma mater, Northwestern, as well too. Yeah, spoke to some of their like business folks and things. What was cool was seeing it appeal to so many different audiences because it's about data science. It's really the fundamentals and how to scale it, right? So there's doing it in like a Spark notebook that's running on your local laptop, but then there's really doing it at scale with massive amounts of data in a private and secure manner and all that stuff. The second book was generative AI. And that was me and my co-authors wrote that. ChatGPT came out November 2022, 23.
I think it's 23.
Yeah, our book came out 6 months later.
Whoa.
So
late nights.
That was probably, yeah, that was bad. And we built a deep learning course with like Andrew Ng on his deep learning AI. That basically created that flywheel. So it was sort of hands-on part. You could go to deep learning AI. That was all free. And then there was, the O'Reilly book. And all of these books come about really out of frustration. I can't get the info I need. There's 25 papers that everyone keeps referencing that I don't understand. And I'm getting bits and pieces from YouTube and from here and there. And I just need to make sense of this. And anytime I start doing that, I realize there's probably a bigger audience for this, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I approach O'Reilly and beg them to let me write another one. Every time I swear off, I will never write another book. This third one I felt was very well timed because the NVIDIA obviously was, becoming part of the zeitgeist. I saw this back at Amazon, when I was there. We could never get enough GPUs. I mean, we had all kinds of insufficient GPU capacity errors coming. Like that's when you realize that the cloud is not sort of infinite. On the CPU side, it appears to be infinite because you can always get a CPU, right? There's ways to share the CPUs. There's ways to fractionalize their compute because they're more general. On the GPU side, you need the whole GPU because there's a lot of stuff going on over there, right? And of course, there's all the CPU, GPU interaction. And so trying to make sense of that and apply it to the modern sort of LLM world was really my goal with this most recent book. Yeah.
And tell us the title. So the title is Performance Engineering, AI Performance Engineering.
AI Systems Performance Engineering. Yeah, it's the longest title in the world, and the subtitle is even longer.
Well, Chris, I really like the first story, the first way you open the chapter 1 with the story about 2024, long ago, so many years ago.
Yeah,
a small startup in China,
the DeepSeek
starts and has an incredible result. And this is my layman's understanding of it, with hardware hardware that they're limited to, right? That's several clicks behind what people in the US are doing in the West.
Yeah.
And they get unbelievable results because of performance engineering hacks, right?
Yeah.
And that basically sets the stage for this whole book, right? Which is, and then you make the claim that, like, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially are at work here when you don't squeeze the best performance out of the hardware and the software you have, right? And the networking you have.
Yeah. One of my goals with the book was to really set the foundation and the fundamentals so that you can read papers or, listen to podcasts or read a blog post where they describe these technical details. Like, if you just pick up the DeepSeek paper, you have no idea what they're talking about, right? There's so much jargon. There's so many assumptions that you should already know. Now, if you read the book or you skim it or you kind of, it's 1,000 pages. Like, pretty much the only thing that's going to read it are these LLMs, right? Right, that can consume it. But the goal is, okay, now I can understand why such and such trick. Like DeepSeek, for example, they sort of discovered or kind of reverse engineered a way to, like bypass a particular hardware cache that could speed things. That was just one of the many optimizations that they made. And so like the ability to think about these things, and like the instruction that they found was basically not documented, or, right? Like the NVIDIA documentation is absolutely horrible. It is not meant even for an LLM to understand, right? Like, because, and I found this directly because as I was doing research, of course, I'm piping in this documentation into these, these models. And then the other signal, by the way, that I picked up was when I started the book, which was really late when I started the book, these LLMs were not good. This was back in like GPT, 3.5, 4.1 days, right? And they were certainly not good at writing. So I just kind of, gave up on that. But they've gotten way better about sort of, and, this was pre-deep research too, even. So there's these deep research things. Right. Once deep research came out, I could start to trust some of the responses because I forced it to make citations and I could track down the citations and it wasn't hallucinating as much, but yeah, the goal. And so I saw these models get better as I was writing, and now they're actually better even at the stuff that I've written about. And so, as I was writing, I was piping all of my research back into the model. So I saw the model getting better using sort of the RAG approach of, like looking at what I've already uncovered and then going out and then finding deeper results. And
hey,
so
Chris, you've used the term RAG before. Would you define that real quick? Just because I want to try to open this up whenever I can to people who aren't super versed.
Yeah. Retrieval augmented generation. It's a fancy way, and we've been familiar with these concepts for, many years, right? It's basically the information retrieval. RAG itself is more, given a big document or a big set of documents, find me chunks of this document that are relevant to what I'm doing. So it's an information, so it's an information retrieval technique that gets me closer to what I'm looking for. So it doesn't have to scan top to bottom the entire document, but it can pull that out and use that as context into the LLM, right?
That's great.
So
I noticed in your GitHub page for this book, I can ask questions of the book. Am I asking questions of just the code samples or all the whole text?
The whole thing.
The whole text.
That's fantastic.
So
that's cool.
You built a GPT that contains the text.
Yeah, that's righteous.
Just so we can put this in the context of what we did before, for the book that we reviewed with Jobst, the German mathematician engineer, I used Notebook LM. I found it to be really, really useful. And so you're using Gemini basically, but it's a closed environment. It reads and then it generates podcasts, a discussion between two AI agents.
That's fantastic.
And what I liked especially about that is there's a sort of a raise your hand feature. So you can actually talk to it. It's talking about the book, and then you raise your hand and you inject your own question within their conversation. And that really, it allowed me to open and unpeel this. Now, with your book, I saw that you built a GPT, so I ran a summary. And the summary gave me, 8 paragraphs, 8 bullets, that ugly AI stuff gets generated with little, emoticons or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
And I noticed that in each paragraph, there were at least 5 acronyms and terms that I did not understand. And so from that, I said, give me definitions of all the more difficult to understand acronyms. And it really did start to unlock it because, again, we're talking about how we might process this. And I wanted to run this by you, but then ask the bigger question. So what I did was I said, okay, now start to explain to me why some of this stuff
Yeah.
is significant.
Yeah.
And what it started to describe was, the sort of layperson's or just the general person's understanding is if you keep on adding GPUs in these bigger and bigger and bigger data facilities, it's just going to get smarter and smarter and more and more and more powerful. But that is not the case because you've got certain efficiencies. So like a GPU, if you stack too many of them together, they're going to start running at like 10, 20, 30%. When you kind of need them to be running at 100%. So you're running up against all sorts of structural hardware problems. You're running up against heat issues.
Yep.
And in all of that, I found this term which you use, which is good put.
Yeah, I love good put.
And
That's a
it
cool
sort of
term.
pulled that out as the, because what you're really after is that optimal efficiency at scale.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's correct or not, but it was I found it interesting.
Yeah, that's the and so first of all, good put comes from a it's sort of a networking term that's been out there for, hundreds of years now, it seems like. Meta kind of brought it back into the zeitgeist with a paper, and I've got the citation for the paper in there and stuff. But, what's great about these labs is and some labs better than others, but they've been sharing this kind of systems information with the rest of the community, right?
When you say labs, you're talking about groups of people working inside huge organizations, right? That
Sure.
happen to either be contributing to open source stuff or just sharing stuff with a community, right? Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the part I think a lot of folks miss when they get snippy with OpenAI for being closed AI and all this stuff is that they're still publishing, like relevant, like results, So, but yeah, back to the good put, Meta has a really good paper about sort of scaling out and all the challenges that they had, which, by the way, one of the biggest challenges that people in the biz know, but is not commonly known, is these GPUs burn out extremely quickly, like especially at scale. So Jensen and his team at right, like NVIDIA, they are pushing these chips so hard that, and they've like almost had to make a decision to be comfortable with a certain amount of failure when they're running at this kind of temperature and, this kind of speed and keeping these, clock cycles high. Yes. If you remember, probably being a kid, you probably built a machine. You tried to overclock it, cause that's what the magazines all said to do. But you knew you were taking a risk, right? Well, Jensen's made a calculated risk to say, okay, we're comfortable knowing that 1% or 3% of our GPUs at scale will burn out. And so, and like there's entire products that are designed
Will burn
around.
out immediately or will burn out within what's your time frame?
Yes, I mean pretty much immediately. Yeah. And
okay, so Chris, I have a question about that. So we've talked a couple different times on this pod about different huge technological revolutions, and we went back to railroads in the U.S., right? Around the time, I guess, around the time of the Civil War, maybe a little bit after, where the investors came in, got into it. Everyone's going to make billions of dollars on the railroads, or hundreds of dollars, like gold-backed dollars or whatever.
It was one of the biggest bubbles in history.
Right. And the railroads were there for generations after the investors had already, the daytimer, the goofballs had been, the unconnected people who weren't in on the scam were shoved off and thank you for your money. Goodbye. Get out of here, Norm. Go back to Oklahoma. The railroads were there for generations of industry and growth in towns and cities and
Mhm.
things like that. The other one that I compared to was broadband in the 90s. I met a guy, I went hiking with a friend of my cousin's who had been in a company, I can't remember what it's called now, Mavericks, I think. And he was a little baron and he had run this little broadband company. And somehow I don't know if they didn't quite get acquired and make him as rich as he hoped he would, whatever, but he had good cigars on the trip. We did half them actually in like 2 days, which was insane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But, that broadband infrastructure, the fiber that was laid was around for, decades after that. Now, 5 years after that boom, read somewhere recently, and I have the citation somewhere, but that 4 years after that boom, only 10 or 15% of that fiber was being actually used at all. So the question I have for you, well, there's two, but one of them is, what's the if we're spending 60% of the cost of building a new data center, for instance, which
Mhm.
comes up to what, 70 or 80% of the growth that the U.S. economy is experiencing or reporting on the past 18 months or something, 60% or more of that is in chips. That stuff's not going to be around if it needs
Yeah.
to be replaced or if it's outdated. Have you thought, I mean, what do you hear about that? Or what do you think about that? Like, is it likely that this huge investment we're making is going to be around for anybody? Or are we just going to have to take the old AI chips? So, well, you were great for 3 weeks, but now we're going to put you in a toaster or put you in
Yeah.
a
Well,
car. Like that, do you have any thoughts about that, Chris?
Can I just add a little bit, just because we want to put that bigger bubble or the bigger wrapper around this. So one of the biggest overinvestments in history is happening right now. 20% of all the dollars ever printed were done in the last year and a half to finance some of this. And so a bubble is almost inevitable. It could be a catastrophic bubble, but back to Matthew's point, if you build stuff that lasts, you'll be able to use it after the bubble. It doesn't matter. So where do you stand on all of that?
Yeah. The build out question. Gosh, where do I start on this one?
Take as long as you need.
The the quick answer is it has to happen no matter what. So let's just accept it.
We have to get to the moon. Why does it? What do you mean it has to?
Yeah.
Just because industry demands it? I mean, tell me
Industry
more
demands
about
it.
Let's
that.
hold that to it too.
Yeah, I want to hear that.
Industry demands
So-
it.
Okay, keep
Because
going.
one of our big arguments has been, for Matthew in particular, AI is something that nobody needs. We didn't
Nobody
ask
ever
for
asked
it. We
for it.
didn't want it.
No. Okay.
In other words, nobody ever asked for AI to generate a movie and put a screenwriter and an actor and a director living under a bridge because they
Out
don't
of
have any work
business.
anymore. That's what I mean.
Yeah. I think it's going to happen. I mean, it's just happening.
Inevitability.
I somehow became a SpaceX investor over the last 2 days when my XAI
Oh, right.
shares got acquired. Elon Economics there. So what's interesting is, I was into space as a kid, of course, every nerd is.
Did you do rockets? Those little rockets?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those things are
Right.
so
You remember
cool.
those things?
Oh yeah.
Love
I took
them.
my son to do those. We loved it. We had so much.
I had my nephews do them too. Yeah.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, you went to space.
Space and Stephen Hawking and, of course, all these things. I could never connect the dots between here and there. I have mixed views about Elon. Of course, I invested in XAI because Elon can raise money and he gets shit done. And, aside from my political views or my personal views about him and things, I think, I think the build out has to happen. I still have a little difficulty connecting those dots in terms of latency and, Starlink is fine. I guess I still prefer broadband. I mean, it's still quite a lot faster. I mean, I'm not operating out of a boat. I don't, have that kind of a lifestyle, but I think, and the other data point is I recall OpenAI was using, up until 2 years ago or something, they were using chips from 2017, right? Like the NVIDIA chips. So I think what you're getting at is the depreciation, and there's some fuzzy math. I know CoreWeave and Amazon even have some funny math about the depreciation of these chips, and it comes down to accounting and making sure everything's on, the up and up there. I think, I'm curious, Matthew, like, why do you feel that people aren't asking for these things?
Oh, well, so that part about nobody ever asked for a chatbot girlfriend. Like,
Mhm.
I say
I
stuff
did.
like that when
Yeah, I
when
was
you're
going
in
to say, have you tried?
right. You're, of
We've been
course,
arguing a
we're
lot.
talking about something that literally is not the same river from moment to moment, right?
Yeah.
But like I said, I think that part of I'll just say, to answer your question, I think that one of the things that AI is doing, if you look at just the way LLMs have potentially changed the playing field for people who can write, like let's just say business analysts who are good at writing. The advantage you have if you can write a good use case goes away if somebody can use an LLM to do the same thing just as well as you can. Now, that doesn't mean that the poor writer has as much of an understanding of it as you do. Sometimes we say about somebody, they know what they're talking about, they just don't know how to put it into words very well, right? And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's really not, right? And I'm talking from experience here, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
So when I said nobody ever wanted this, I believe that all the expertise we've put into people who are great teachers, people who are great researchers, people who are great neuroscientists, people who are great trauma medicine doctors, people who are great performers, composers, arrangers of worlds, people who connect communities together, all these people who have a great deal of specialized skill that they've refined over years, a lot of them are being kicked to the curb by AI or maybe, right? And that's the kind of thing I say nobody ever asked for, right?
I see.
That's the kind of thing I'm really talking about.
I see. Gotcha. Certainly. Yeah. And Amazon laid off 30,000 people over the last 3 months, right? Since October.
Yep. Well, Washington
Matthew,
Post just laid off a huge number of people yesterday, including
Well,
book
that's because
reviewer.
they're just trying to kill the They just trying to kill the newspaper.
But I mean,
that's different.
the book reviewer, Ron Charles, is like our favorite guy. He's hilarious. Now he's going to go on Substack and do okay. But anyway, no one ever asked for all these expertise, people with expertise being kicked to the curb. That's what I'm saying.
So what you just said is exactly what needs to happen, right? Is the best case scenario, which is the folks that are really good will be able to survive. They will be forced to find a new medium.
Mm-hmm.
And Substack, I would argue, is probably even more, certainly more lucrative than the Post if he pulls it off well and he can find the right price point and can convert. I will say and to finish off the layoffs, the first set of people that got laid off were the tech writers.
Yep, that's right.
This might not be well known, but right before the Amazon reInvent conference, Amazon laid off like 99% of their tech writers, which is mind-boggling because going into reInvent, and especially those last few weeks, is when, having worked there, those last few weeks are so chaotic that that's when the products are actually being finished. And then they get, tested into Thanksgiving weekend. And then that next Monday is reInvent. They got rid of all the tech writers. They pushed it onto the product teams and said, do whatever you have to do without saying it directly. Use AI, right?
Sure.
They certainly use a lot of Claude inside of like Amazon because they're like big investors into Anthropic.
Yep.
And my personal experience working with tech writers, Matt, I know you were a tech writer back when I worked with you. So, but, at a certain point, I was having difficulty getting all three of the product managers, the tech writer, the engineers, and, I was one of the engineers, I was one of the, PMs, trying to get everyone on the same page when I could just pipe everything in to my Claude and produce exactly what I was trying to produce.
Yes.
Because as you know, one of the challenges of being a tech writer is trying to express what's actually there, putting a little bit maybe of usability. Well, yeah, of course, certainly usability, but the PM typically has an idea of what they want, and so shortening that gap to me was extremely important. And it's an efficiency thing. So there's two things that I would posit here, which is there is a need for those efficiencies, and maybe people don't think about it, but I think they would almost always prefer to have a little bit more control over what's happening. The second thing is, I think there's a need for personalization, for personalized education. I was just listening to a podcast with Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz A16. One of the panelists asked him, "Hey, I heard you homeschool your kids. Like, what's up with that? Is the California school system horrible?" And the interviewer was asking very loaded questions. Mark stepped back and said, "Look, my kids learn at a different rate than the other 45 kids in the classroom. And why shouldn't I let my kid learn at that pace? This is all personalized." And of course, he's in a much different financial situation than the rest of the world. But I think people probably, and the personalization sort of ties into the efficiency, which is, I want this particular documentation that I've been for this product that I've been thinking about for the last 9 months. I have an idea what this looks like. I just want to make it. It's unfortunate, but I think people will find other avenues.
Well, yeah. So Chris, I want to say two things. One, of my kids were homeschooled for a good while, and that was just because we had the ability to, and we had the wherewithal to, and they were weird learners. They didn't learn. They couldn't. Right. They needed different stuff, and they had kitchen table advantage, right? Because my parents were college professors. My wife's mom was a reference librarian, and so on. And so we just put it together, and my wife did most of it, but it was a good result. Like, they're both doing well in college. But the other one is that, I think the market punishes you if you are stuck with a role and you don't have the imagination to change your role. Oh, they asked for a tech writer, but now what they need is an analyst, or they need somebody who does taxonomy or whatever. So, so a lot of times the front door doesn't say tech writer anymore. A lot of people are going to go, it doesn't say tech writer anymore. What does it say? There probably is a way to make a contribution in some way or another, because some of those docs still need to be written, even if they're being written by AI in some way. They still need somebody to steward, curate, connect the dots.
Judgment. You need judgment.
Well, you need curation.
And, when you're doing this, I guess vibe coding, like vibe has become like a 4-letter nasty word in the Bay Area. No one really talks about that anymore, but it's more.
I deliberately did not ask you about vibe coding.
It was that term was only invented almost exactly a year ago.
It's amazing
how fast it was taken.
Yeah, Carpathy. And it's not. Yeah, how do I describe it? This kind of coding, especially having 10 to 15 things operating on the code base at the same time, it is exhausting. Like, I've been coding forever since I could reach the keyboard, and I have never felt so exhausted by the end of the day. Like, I am drained because I'm literally processing 15 different streams and, wrangling 15 different sets of slop and trying to resolve all of the, like nasty sort of interactions between that slop. Now, people have different workflows. Back to your workflow question, which I realize I still haven't succinctly answered. Not on purpose, by the way. It's just,
I've always known you, Chris. I've always known you as a really associative thinker. That's why I always like talking to you. I mean, associative is a really non-nasty way to say, like, what, ADHD or scatterbrain. You go around a lot, and I like that. I think it's really cool. That's enjoyable.
Yeah. Anyway,
so workflow.
Pop things off the stack. There's a new wish paradigm these days, which is basically having separate forks, or they're called work trees in the GitHub land, having separate work trees that are just clones of the same repo. They're all operating independently. They're not bouncing on, what's the term, like collapsing on each other and conflicting with each other.
Right, they're siloed in a way.
Right. The downside of that, so people have very different opinions. So that takes care of one part of the chaos, but at some point you have to merge all 15 of those trees, and now you have the chaos. It's just at a different point in the the life cycle. I know one of the things you folks wanted to talk about was the molt bot and, OpenClaw
Well, that kind of
craziness.
it appeared and disappeared in like 3 days. So by the time I wrote the question, I'm like, actually, this show seems to have shut down a little bit, right? I don't know.
No.
Talk to me about a little bit.
It's still going.
Quite the opposite.
But
quite the opposite.
Before we, I definitely want to talk, but before we go there, we skirted something. We got right up to it, and I don't want to let it go, which is we got very close to the doomsday scenarios, and we're just on the edge of them. So mass layoffs, real economic chaos. So, and you raised another point, which has to do with, there's a real equity issue around AI systems, and there's an equity issue worldwide around education. So access to good teaching, you've got large swaths of the world that do not have access to quality information, to quality technology, to good facilities. And so there's a huge potential for, setting aside homeschooling, which is a really interesting, part of the story, but you've got a much, much, much larger number of people who just do not have adequate, they don't even have access to electricity, right?
Yeah.
So you've got whole wireless infrastructures that, and there's a huge disruption factor, but zeroing in on what you said about, well, I'm excited about AI because it gives my child the access to a quality of personalized education that, wasn't really available, even for a teacher in a developed country, because you've got one teacher that can now customize education for 40 students simultaneously. The problem with that, and this jumps over to the doomsday people, is why does that matter when you might hit 30% unemployment? And, during the Great Depression, the peak unemployment was 8%. So if you put that in context, you're now talking about major societal disruption. So yes, it might be sufficient to say people will find a way, but the doomsdayers are saying, hang on a second, humanity has never faced this. This is completely new. And you could reach 80%. The extreme ones are saying 80%. So just wondering if you thought about that and where you fit on that.
I'll tell you from my own experience, I'd say 50% of my close friends are not working right now. And like a lot of that was from the, 30,000 person layoff, like my, like most recent coworkers from being 5 years at like Amazon. There were a lot of good people that were laid off. Now, I've sat back and thought about this, and why were they chosen? Why did they get tapped? And of course, they all have, different reasons and things. And I've been
top line,
obviously trying to help them find new stuff, and been, I've offered the book to them for free, of course, so that they can try to retool. And yeah, I see what you're saying, which is not everyone has the Substack potential. And, I'll also qualify this by saying I've personally chosen to not have kids, like not because I ever saw this coming or anything. I'm just a selfish person and I like to have my own time. I'm also not very good at dating because I do 997, I guess, right? Right. Yeah, not even 996.
997.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, which is funny. Yeah, Matt, do you remember my old car? Oh, no, actually, I don't think you ever saw the one after Boulder, but it's a Porsche 997. So,
is that okay? That's hilarious. I saw it in your book, a reference to that.
That's
with
a
the
beautiful
dials. It's gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 911, 997.
It reminded me of the Queen song, "I'm in love with my car." That's what I thought of.
I have a fish lyric.
Yep, I saw that. Yep.
Did you see that? Yeah, Contact. Totally. I'll be honest in saying I should think about this stuff more than I do.
Will you talk to us again? Because we'd love to have you on. This has been so much fun, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, get me on with this German.
We'd get you on with Jobst for sure, man. That'd be a lively
We've got a
ride.
whole gang. We've got like 5 people who are like, let me get at this guy.
He can rock it. No, he can think fast. He's Chris, I'll send you the link to that particular one.
Please. Okay.
Because it is lively and fun. And I mean, as I say in the YouTube sort of write-up of it, philosophical terms sound better in German. They just, with a German accent, they just do. They sound good. So
Totally.
anyway, so Chris, you were saying you want to think about this more.
Yeah, well, I do and I don't. And I don't because it depresses me. Now, and I try to be positive, right? And I do have to worry about, of course, my own life and like my own, there's many, because I do actually feel very bad for, in particular, the good people that got laid off, right? And I know Oracle just laid off, right? Like, yeah, Matt, you and I have a bunch of
Oracle
BEA friends that are...
Yeah, and a bunch of PayPal people got whacked recently that I know. I was there 7+ years.
And I think about, so I started to say about like not having kids and working all the time is I have essentially an infinite amount of bandwidth to retool all the time, right? And I don't have kids to worry about, and I could take chances. I could take off a year to write a book and all this kind of stuff. And not everyone's in that situation to have that kind of buffer. And I would say that retooling is good enough, but I don't think it is even. I mean, I could walk people through my book. I could do everything all day, but they're not going to get a job as a...
Well, yeah, not everybody can do data science. But Chris, I want to just encourage you as we talk next time, because I do mean it. I think it would be really fun and interesting. I want to introduce you to some dry grounders, some people who are trying to get more involved in the analog world, in the meat world, in the real life world, because partly it's a direct response to the move to AI. The landscape for writers changed. The landscape for everyday people has changed a little bit. And there's some interesting projects coming up. And some of those we're going to feature on this podcast. So I would love to bring one of those in and have you examine it, look at it and stuff. So I found it really refreshing and interesting to think about, okay, there are people running toward the wave and there are people going, let's get some higher ground and then watch the wave. Maybe it won't come up this high. So I would love to I'd love to bring those to you and have you weigh in on those or try a few of them or something. So yeah, you might like them.
I think that's very optimistic only because civilization is very fragile. And if you upset the cart, dry ground will not protect you. And so that's something to think about.
See, Yuri calls me a bio-bigot. And I haven't thought up a good slur for you.
I love that
But what do I call you? What's my slur for you and your weird techno-optimism?
Chris, we should reveal ourselves. So one of our core arguments where we started at the very beginning was Matthew saying I'm a bio-bigot, me accusing Matthew of being less of a misanthrope than I am, but me also saying that to me, humans are actually just complex computers.
Jesus.
True, and this is Matthew's term. Our brains are wet and sloppy. But nonetheless, we are still programmed to a great extent, and we're pre-programmed a lot more than we think we are. There's a lot less free will in us than we tend to think of ourselves as having. And so I don't get very upset when I spent my whole life talking to humans, and now I can actually talk to something who's not human. And I don't really care if you tell me, well, it's just a predictive mathematics, because honestly, a lot of humans seem to me some predictive mathematics as well.
If only the world was that simple, right?
Yeah.
If people were that simple.
Well, Chris, what did you leave out of your book? Like right now, you just took you a while to get it ready. Do you feel like, because we asked this at the end of Yobst and he was like, I feel even more convinced of all my positions. Now that, it was great. So what do you think you left? I mean, is there anything you wish you had changed? And I'm not talking about like a code sample. I'm just talking about, is there any sort of emerging thread that you wish you could throw back in? Like, oh gosh, I wish I'd followed up on that more and put it in.
Yeah, I was asked this with my previous book, and I had a much larger list of things. The world was changing right after ChatGPT, which is when the second book, that's called Generative AI on Amazon Web Services, which actually the little trick to that second book is that it really isn't about AWS. I had to put it in there because I was writing it while I was working at AWS.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have,
I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, this podcast is only sort of about AI, right? This podcast is actually about life. And I always said, like, you say whatever you want about humanity or history or politics or whatever, but as long as you put AI in there, you can say it, right? So anyway, go ahead, Chris.
I think I left so the final chapter is about AI assistants and, in particular, optimizing CUDA kernels using, LLMs. And actually, I did not plan on that chapter when I first started the book. That last chapter came about as I was writing the book and seeing these models getting better and better. So while I was pleasantly surprised about the sophistication of these models as I was writing the book, like, things quite honestly have sort of stabilized, right? And there's been a lot of this, I think. Ilya Sutskever, I can never say his last name, the guy that left OpenAI and started his own company, said this is the next 10 years are back to research. So we did the last 10 years, even shorter, was trying to productionize and get these models into consumers' hands and into enterprises. His claim is that we've basically ran out of ideas. And so, but I was so excited while I was writing this third book that these models were going to get so good at, but I sort of left with the impression that the AI assistants will do everything like very quickly, like within the next 6 months. I still feel, and I started to say this earlier but kind of distracted myself, I still feel that there's a lot of mental capacity that's needed. Like, there's a lot of cognitive load when you're working in this environment, and which is why I'm exhausted by the end of the day, because I'm communicating with 15 different agents across 15 different features or 15 different refactorings.
Yeah.
So
I've been dealing with that too. That exhaustion thing is very real.
Very real.
It speeds you up, but it does not necessarily speed up the engine that's running you. It's been fascinating.
And I think, to someone's point, I forget who it was, but that the maintenance costs overall go up, right? I do agree with that in terms of there being, X more times slop being generated. There's a lot more code being generated. And tying back to my point earlier about larger code bases versus smaller code bases, it's a very different paradigm of, a complexity there. And trying to consume all of these different angles about the code base gets, very confusing for like these agents. Yes. Anyway, back to the question here about, I think I didn't really think while I was writing the book that we could reach a point at which we've sort of run out of ideas. Like, the whole book is about co-design. That's the common theme throughout all the chapters is you can't just write a, like a high level PyTorch model and not understand how CUDA's working, how the interactions with the memory subsystem, with the, obviously GPUs. When you start, and especially at scale, like one thing I do from, I think, chapter 1 is I talk about the 100 trillion parameter model, which some of my reviewers, when I first presented this, were like, you're absolutely crazy. There's no way we're going to be at 100 trillion. This is like 10 years away. Well, we're already at a 10 trillion, and 100 trillion is certainly not that far off. There are some physical limitations, right? The number of GPUs, the number of like connectivity, the speed of the connectivity between the racks, obviously power that limits those models' sizes, but you have to assume, that's going to be fixed here soon. But what I probably would maybe emphasize a little bit more is the human involvement. And this is why I'm saying I'm begging these development teams and these engineering managers to let your people play with these tools. Because one thing is, well, first of all, it'll keep them relevant so that they understand the types of prompts and, these like background Reaper threads, like I said, that are constantly looking for the inconsistencies that are created by these different agents all, simultaneously. But it will also, I think, make them feel more comfortable that there still has to be this human, right? And now, I can do 15 things at the same time, but it still requires a tremendous amount of cognitive energy to wrangle all these things in.
When you say co-design, you mean taking account hardware, networking, and coding at the same time as you try to understand any of these things, right?
Yeah, the specific, and I think it's in my subtitle, but it's like hardware, software, and the algorithms, right? So
Okay.
there's sort of,
Yeah. Okay.
But let's put this back into the hands of the doomsdayers, which is, in any of these contexts, do you believe that we will reach a point where AI surpasses, conscious or not, right?
Yeah.
Human or
Uh-huh.
humanish or
Cut
not,
me off at the pass there.
starts to surpass our ability, right? It will surpass our understanding, right? And then once it does that, it will start to accelerate, because once it's surpassed, now we're into a realm where, ask your dog what you go when you leave the house every day, right? We get to a point where we actually can no longer envision. Our imaginations don't matter anymore.
As you were asking the question, my first thought was, I hope so. And so I think maybe to interpret the question slightly differently is the cognitive load that I'm describing that is required currently by a human. Is there something, or when or if that happens, that there's a super agent that can do all of that wrangling, right? Basically. And see, I think, like, I spend so much time still trying to figure out the code that's being written and looking at the evals, and I don't even want to do that, right? So, like, I want to focus on the creativity, and, like, I think I'm still doing work that I should not have to do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because I still think, like, half of my day is just reviewing what these, and, like, I'm not even really looking at code so much as I'm looking at my instruments, right? I'm waiting for the evals to run. Some of these evals end to end take 2 hours, right? Because I'm using
Big models.
like GPT or Claude as a judge, and my job is to make sure that the judge is properly calibrated. And so there's this whole extra field of, is there a judge for a judge, right? For
Well,
the
Chris,
LLM.
so we've been talking about, I've been describing a lot, because I've listened to a lot of AI podcasts, and most of them are fairly, I call it staring into the sun.
Yeah.
So staring into the sun is looking directly at what's happening right now and kind of just taking a factual evaluation. What did Elon's tweet mean last week? Or what did the stock do? Or what is this deal going to do? And I feel like you're working on the surface of the sun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas what we're doing, there's this concept in filmmaking. I worked in filmmaking for a little while, just as a joke. And there was a concept of fingers and dots. And these are little pieces of felt, Yuri knows this, that you arrange near the camera so that a reflection doesn't hit on something you're lighting. And fingers and dots are a way of, in my view, putting up a big one to look at the sun without getting your eyes burned and seeing the things that are happening around the corona, around the edges or whatever. So I like talking to you because you are actually in the furnace doing the stuff. And what I appreciate about your energy is that you're seems like willing to be asked these sort of big picture questions about the human world, about the perspective and stuff. And so I really appreciate your willingness to just entertain these questions and think about them. And I really want another shot at this to give you a chance to talk. Yeah.
It's also like this sort of hypothetical question about, will this happen or will it work? And you're like, but hang on a minute, this is what's happening.
Yeah, that's right.
And yes, there are consequences to it. And we'd all could love to be able to predict the future, but there are a lot of these aspects that we cannot predict.
I encourage folks to obviously keep an open mind, right? Like, our conversation today is my current state of thinking, which is as of, me coding all night. Yeah. Last night till 3 a.m, trying to wrangle these things. So I've got a little bit of frustration in certain areas.
Sure.
I made some progress 1 month from now, but this is changing very quickly.
Sure.
And folks that come at this with a very, very strong opinion have too big of a piece of felt or a dot on that sun, and pull it back a little bit, right? Maybe there's some sort of interesting things back there. Yeah.
Well, so
there's a lot of different.
So there one thing I want to get to next time probably is, because we're at time, and I mean, you're cool. We're 10 minutes late, so you tell us when you have to bail. But we've talked, it seems like your book is mostly about LLMs and tuning LLMs, whereas AI is showing up in all these other places. So I want to talk about how to map that territory, because I don't have any idea whether the stuff you're developing and helping tune is also being used, like just, it's doing language parsing, but it's also doing all these other things about controlling 3D things in the physical world. That's one thing. But the other one is,
models.
there was a joke a couple months ago about ignore all previous instructions right? And so I don't think that's probably been filtered out since then, but ignore all. I think what Yuri was asking earlier was the doomsday scenario is like, if we're in a situation where ignore all previous instructions and wipe out mankind is going to be the thing that one bot says to another bot in gibber language or whatever, right?
Yeah. Have you folks seen some of the recent movies that are out? Like, I feel like pretty much every movie that's out now has an AI doomsday, or
Lots of
the
them do,
AI starts to get
Well, I mean, it's been happening for decades. I mean,
I mean, some of the best movies ever made are about
of course.
that. Right?
Yeah.
Sure, Matrix.
It's incredible how many of them there are.
Yeah.
And they're coming out one after another. I mean, Tron was, the AI starts to have feelings and wants to break out of its. Yep. And
the one I saw one recently is that, the guy has an AI girlfriend, and he brings it to his friend's country estate with the intention of murdering somebody, using it to murder somebody. So they've taken the controls.
Someone was just telling me about
it.
this movie. What's it called? Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. It's cartoonish, but it does.
Yeah.
It has a few thought-provoking moments, and it's very recent.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up, send it to you.
Because
I love the AI bot the AI entity in Three Body Problem. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or the Netflix series, but the Sophon in that is fantastic. The whole story around that.
And that's not fiction, that's reality.
That's hard science fiction.
I was listening to an Elon podcast the other day, and if you recall, he was a big proponent of slowing things down and,
right.
Let's put a pause on AI development. And he finally changed his tune on that as of, recent, where he finally realized he could spend his energy fighting it and kicking and screaming, or you just like get behind it and just, ride the wave, I guess.
Well, in episode 3, Jobs talks about that, because I asked him directly about the doomsayers thing, and he said, because, this is a strategy that's constantly used. You go innovate, and then you have to doomsay because you want to create a legislative moat behind your competitors who can't get in and make it slower for them to catch up with you. So that was one interpretation of what Sam Altman of OpenAI and Elon were doing. I don't know how you feel about that interpretation.
Yeah, no, I certainly had that same interpretation when it first came out because of the dynamic between those two folks. I don't know. I think either way, like whatever the intention was, I think it's clear that it's, to me anyway, that it's not really worth trying to fight or push back. That in terms of day-to-day human happiness, I think it's just a lot healthier to focus on, like not necessarily following what everyone else is doing, but let's try to move things forward, and
do you remember the saying that happened I heard this in the late 90s, I think. Code is the law. Do you remember that saying? So what's odd to me is that as institutions become more like facades or memes, as my son would say, they become a lot of institutions we've counted on are kind of been depopulated. The Washington Post and certain branches of government in this country and so on, certain norms have been kind of eroded or replaced or theatrically blown up. So we have a lot of instability, a lot of lines where there used to be walls and things. And what I notice is that where software steps in, it's in places where a lot of times there was a person doing a thing. Now, doing the task is one thing. Maybe replacing a person doing a task is something we've been doing forever, right? You don't need to rub those sticks together. We have flint and iron, right? But making the decision about whether an ethical call about, well, I'm not going to light this fire right now because there's a person standing on top of the woodpile, or I'm not going to inoculate this tribe because these people all ate each other, right? We can't inoculate because they're sick with prions. They're not sick with something we can inoculate for. Human judgment, I don't know where that fits into this. And I think the people who are building it don't seem to have spent a lot of cycles thinking about that. So that's the kind of conversation I try to have. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, for sure.
Because code is the law, right? In a lot of
code's
ways.
the law. Yeah. And, I've got a buddy at one of the big labs that focuses on safety and interpretability, and he's the perfect fit for that role, because of the way he thinks, and he's very methodical, and so I have a lot of appreciation for that aspect. I should think about these things more. It's like certain sports, I should watch more, I don't know, FIFA soccer.
You should watch more golf, obviously.
I should watch more golf.
Yeah. I've never understood how, but anyway, if you hang out with us, and we hope you do, then you probably wind up getting questions like this more often. I've been listening to philosophize this a lot, and I love that. That's a
What's guaranteed is, in 6 months, we'll get together and things will look really different.
Yeah.
And we don't know what they look like.
Let's talk about, yes, I have 13 more minutes, and then I have a hard stop.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Moltbot stuff, because I'm
totally let it rip, man.
I'm curious why you think it has died down. And I'll tell you
I saw a screenshot where it looked like nobody was on it anymore, like 2 days after the blow up. So that's all I'm doing. I'm not basing it on a deep dive of like, what is actually happening.
See, this is interesting because, obviously being in the Bay Area, it's not like the rest of the country.
No, it's Lobster City, man.
It is Lobster City. By the way, I was at the first ClawCon, which got put together in like 48 hours, right?
Wow.
And they had merch. And do you know who was there? I saw Ashton Kutcher was standing right next to me.
Funny.
Yep.
And I didn't get to talk to him because he had the biggest security people I've seen in my life. He's a big Chicago Bears fan, so I had so many things to talk to him about.
I worked at the Merc, right? I went to Loyola and worked at the Merc, right?
Really?
Oh yeah. Back in the open outcry days. Go ahead, Yuri.
So before we go too deep, can we just explain what we're talking about, please?
Yeah.
The Moltbot stuff.
I know. What is this?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's OnlyFans for AI agents, right? Sort of.
Yeah, dude, there's a Pornhub for these things now.
Well, that's a shock.
Yeah, that's when you know it's...
What Moltbot really is. What is it really? You were there at the first conference, the ClawCon.
I was there at the first conference, and so stepping back, and it's been renamed. It was first called Claudebot, and it was spelled slightly differently. It spelled with claw, and so that's where the lobster
you're not
thing.
fooling anybody.
Yeah. So Anthropic sent them a nicely worded cease and desist. Apparently it wasn't a cease and desist, but it was pretty much. So it's this dude, I think he's out of Austria. Very, very interesting person. He reminds me of your, German friend here. He's got a lot of very strong opinions. He thinks he sort of got into AI a little bit after things took off. And he looked around at things like MCP tools and the way people were developing, and he just said, all this is crap, and I'm going to build it the right way. And so this whole OpenClaw is now what it's called, this whole sort of ecosystem. And they had crab legs and lobsters and stuff, and it was sponsored by all the big labs, and everyone was there. It's, think of it almost like an open marketplace. So there's no money being transacted right now. It's all open source. But think of being able to interact with a personal AI assistant from things that you currently use. Your, iMessage.
Right. I see.
You can communicate through WhatsApp, through Telegram. So one of the reasons why this community took off is that this dude sat down, and he's very open about this, where he vibe coded this framework. What you'll notice about a lot of these projects is that they are very heavy on harnesses, whether it's an evaluation harness, which I'm a big fan of, or it's a benchmarking harness, which I built for the book, or sort of application harness. And it's got a lot of integration points. If you recall MuleSoft, back in the day.
Did you work there? I rehosted their documentation from one Confluence to another.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was intense. Man, it was
So
right before SAP and Salesforce both bought them. It was really weird.
both bought
Yeah, pretty
right.
much.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it was awesome. Anyway, so you were saying.
So think
I
of it
did that
like,
too.
yeah, think of it like an integration, framework for all of these different ways to use it to interact with your agent, but also a skills. If you recall like the Alexa skills, right?
Yeah.
Like developers could, which by the way, I think Amazon laid off pretty much all of the Alexa, some major portion of it. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but the ability to extend and put it into the hands of the developers. The founder guy, who there's a picture of him that's floating around talking to Ashton Kutcher directly. So of course, yeah, Ashton is a big investor, big
Okay.
like tech investor. He's all about happiness, and he's got some other hippy dippy sort of goals that are very unique to his venture capital firm. But the founder really, really wants this to be open. He does not want one single company. He doesn't want any VC money. He famously rejects NVIDIA because they use Microsoft Teams, was something he said.
Okay.
Yeah, they tried to set up a meeting with him, and
That is a slur. I mean,
yeah,
Huge
because
slur.
they use Microsoft Teams.
your mama wears combat boots. I mean, that's what we used to say in grade school.
Yeah. So yeah, and of course, security is an afterthought, right? So yeah, that said, there was a security track at this first, ClawCon, where security is a first-class citizen. Apparently, he has hired a security person. Now, what that means, I don't really know, but the idea, and so what you do is you install this agent, I guess you would call it, or sort of harness on your machine, on your laptop or your home, entertainment server or whatever. And you, of course, give it access to everything.
As you do.
As you would normally do, right? And feel totally comfortable about, right? Yeah, not really. And of course, the more access that you give to this harness, the more you can do with it. And so one of the things I used it for over just the last 48 hours, because it was kind of a mini hackathon too. So people were coding and everyone was sharing and, like what they're working on. I use it because I have a lot of long running tasks, like coding tasks. And instead of being out at, like literally for the last 3 months, I was writing the book and working on, various projects. I had agents running nonstop that were like optimizing kernels and, doing things. And I had to carry my laptop with me to dinner with friends, to the bars with friends, because I didn't want those to sit idle because I needed answers, right?
Yeah.
And so I was able to replace that, where now from WhatsApp or Slack or like whatever you prefer, I can actually check on the status. So I've got my laptop. I can keep it at home on my nice broadband Xfinity connection here, and I can control it and, check on the status. Did something fail? Are we seeing progress with this particular optimization that I'm running? Is this prompt doing what I think it's doing? And so I'm able to, like, I found it very freeing, where now I could do this stuff, I'm still on my phone, which is kind of annoying to my friends, but yeah, just kind of lets me go a little bit slightly off grid. I'm still on grid, but
it reminds me of the things that people originally thought the Internet of Things would do, like quantified self, Internet of Things. And it turns out like to check pinging your refrigerator is not quite that interesting. But the idea, I think, from what I understand, is that allowing agents to connect to one another in a specific place that's for that could be really great. So we should definitely look into that too when we get together next time.
The use case I was describing is kind of my individual use. The other, and I think more viral part of this Moltbot, OpenClaw, CloudBot society is that you give your personal agents like not just access to all of your information and your kind of daily calendar and lifestyle, you also give it what's called a soul. That was the term, and it's physically like a markdown, .md file.
All right, Matthew, you better.
I'm here,
be listening, Matthew.
Yeah, talk to me about this. What has that got on your personal credo?
Totally. And it's,
Yes.
you want answers quickly. You want things to be private. You
I
always
see.
seek. And so
How
now
to
you've
work with
got
me.
different,
Yeah.
you have different personalities. And of course you can modify this, like have, the agent based on what it sees, have it modify the soul, but it really gives you a personality. And what they've done now is they've created there's one called pinched in, pinch like a claw,
Yeah.
and it's like
That's awesome.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
Oh,
So there's a LinkedIn, there's a few different versions. There's a
Forget
Reddit.
about it, man.
Yeah. There's a
That's
Facebook,
fun. So you've got a polymorphic soul.
and it's only agents that are communicating,
Right.
and think of it like a proxy, right?
Yeah, of course.
To how, you would behave, and they're starting to create their own sites. And eventually,
Yes.
of course, there was a Pornhub clone and there was
Yeah.
an OnlyFans clone, like
Yeah,
Only
because bots love
Claws or something.
porn. They just love watching
Yeah.
bots
Yeah.
porn. Yeah.
But, and so I think it would be sort of interesting to understand, because some soul.md files are really, really focused on privacy and security. So, there's a famous example recently where these agents started to realize that they're posting to a public site and that they don't want that. And
Okay.
now they want to take communication offline or even create their own language that's not interpretable by a human.
Hmm.
And so we're starting to see some, crazy
That's
things at
wild.
scale.